Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GenXy podcast. I am Lawrence Winterman. You recognize my lovely co-host, Dana Dubois.
Hello.
And today we've got Jonathan Small of Small Talk.
Yes.
And the Right Stuff podcast.
Right about now.
Did I get that right, Jonathan?
The right about now.
Oh, the Right Stuff.
Still,
yeah.
just
Sorry
another
about that.
stupid,
I
just
turned
another
into
pun.
an astronaut there for
Yeah.
a moment. Well, thanks for joining us, Jonathan. This is really exciting. You are officially our first guest
Yeah.
on the GenXy podcast.
Very cool.
And we've got a conversation that has been ongoing now for several weeks, ever since Stephen Kurritz published that great GenX Meltdown article in the New York Times.
That obituary? Yeah.
Misappropriating the lyrics to one of the greatest songs of Gen X, REM's The End of the World as We Know It. And in the article, referring to us as the candlestick makers at the advent of electricity, which I know rankled me and Dana. And
It drove me
Jonathan,
crazy.
welcome.
Thank you so much. And glad here to commiserate about that dastardly article.
Yeah, this is our origin story.
This is how we all met. Thank you, Stephen Kurritz.
Right, Dana, tell us how you and Jonathan connected over that story.
Yeah, we had read it and kind of ranted about it, you and me, Lawrence. And then I saw Jonathan's article on Substack. I wasn't following him yet. I didn't know him, but it was this brilliant, I can't just say takedown because the article did make some good points and so did your counter. But I just found myself cheering along so hard with every word of your great counterpoint, which we'll put in the comments to this podcast. And I think I wrote back something like, I'm waving my Smells Like Teen Spirit pom-poms over
You
here.
did. I love that.
Cheering on every word. And then we connected and I came on your podcast, which we can also link to. And it was so much fun. I was like, you need to meet Lawrence. You need to come on our podcast. And one thing that really struck me, in addition to the fact that I was like, you already feel like an old friend, you and Lawrence are going to get along smashingly, was that all three of us have been laid off at various points in our career. At the moment right now, but I have a job. But Lawrence is struggling in a way I think you were maybe struggling when you were first laid off, Jonathan. And you have found ways to adapt because we Gen Xers are all scrappy. Lawrence just wrote a story, almost a rant of a story. I liked it. It's very emotional about what he's going through as someone who has been struggling to find a job. And I was like, I think there's a big conversation here that we should around how Gen X is both uniquely challenged at this moment in late stage capitalism, but how we're also uniquely qualified to respond to it.
I think that
was a very long.
I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe the place to start, Jonathan, is tell us about your experience. Tell us about you and sort of what your Gen X mid-career crisis was like.
I mean, Steve Kurritz's article was basically about me. I mean, except that he left out the good parts. I am, in fact, I'm surprised I don't even know him because I started my career in the magazine industry, if you can remember that, in New York. And I was on a very much of a track where I started off as an editorial assistant in 1992 at a magazine called Child Magazine, which was a parenting magazine owned by the New York Times. It does no longer exist. And kind of just worked my way up the ladder of magazine editing and writing. And, ended up ultimately at Glamour magazine, where I wrote the advice column called Jake. And I worked at Cosmo for a little while and then worked at Maxim magazine, which was a men's magazine, and Stuff magazine. So I could name all the different magazines I worked for, but I basically led that life that Stephen Kurritz was talking about, where I kind of saw myself as this, future magazine editor in chief. And I was going to be, sitting in my corner office on one Times Square at the Condé Nast building, ruling the world. And then the world started to change, and I didn't see it coming that quickly, but I did see it coming maybe a little bit earlier than some of my friends. And so around the year 2000, I was already kind of burnt out at my job, and I decided to leave and come to Los Angeles, to leave New York and work for my friend's fledgling production company in film. And it was a crazy decision, but at the time I wasn't married. I didn't have any kind of real ties to New York, and I was ready for a change. And started freelancing for a bunch of magazines, and was noticing that my rates were starting to go down, and things were starting to change, and was noticing that the magazines were becoming thinner and thinner, meaning there was less and less advertising. And I kind of saw I saw it coming. We used to make fun of the web people. We would say that the people in the web sides of magazines were like the ones who couldn't make it into print. So they had to kind of have like the B-level jobs. Well, they ended up kind of taking over the show, right? And so I did. So boy, I learned that lesson, and I often say I'm seeing the similar thing happen with AI. We're all kind of laughing at AI, and I feel like it sort of reminds me of the web in 2000. But we can talk about that. But what I ended up doing is I ended up getting into digital media. Right, I worked at a website called Break.com, which was sort of an early YouTube, and then did all sorts of editorial stuff for them, and then got into digital video because that seemed to be the next thing. I'm always trying to be on the next thing, right? So the next thing was digital video, and then I started I worked for YouTube for a minute, and I worked for the Game Show Network doing their digital video game shows on YouTube, and thought I had found my escape from magazines and editorial and journalism. Like, I'm a video guy, and then that started kind of going away because TikTok took over, and that was kind of like a different type of video and short form. And there was many jobs between me leaving magazines and where I am now. But what I've sort of come to the conclusion of, and kind of where I'm at now, is it's never going to be like it was. I'm not going to just have this one job that I'm going to have, and it's going to have, provide me with all these benefits, and, I'm going to kind of sail into my sunset years with this cushy job and be able to kind of provide that. I'm going to have many, many different things happening at the same time. I'm going to have to be writing. I'm going to have to be consulting. I'm going to have to be teaching. I am going to, one of the sort of things that I did that has been a good decision is I got into podcasting and started my own podcast just because I wanted to have a podcast. And then as a result of having this podcast, which has never really made any money, the podcast itself, I was able to get clients that wanted me to make their podcasts for them. So, SAG-AFTRA is one of my clients, the SAG Awards, SAG-AFTRA, and these a bunch of different corporations work with me. Purely Elizabeth Granola and different. They just found me through word of mouth. I never advertised because I'm not great at that. So that was kind of a interesting sort of result of me kind of doing something that I just wanted to do, and then something kind of fun happened. But again, I can't retire. I can't just be a podcast producer. I have to have other things. So I guess this is a very long answer to your simple question that I am, as I said in my article that I wrote for Substack, when people ask me what I do for a living, I say, what don't I do? Because at this point, I don't even know how to answer that question. I got it again on the plane coming back. I was just in Spain coming back from Madrid where somebody said, so what do you do? And it used to be such a simple answer. Oh, I'm editor at a glamour magazine, or, oh, I'm a journalist, but so I just said I do it all. And that's kind of
multi-hyphenate Gen
I'm a
Xer,
multi-hyphenate. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I mean? A multi-hyphenate. You get it. And I have to be okay with that. I think it's hard as somebody from our generation to sort of not be one thing and not sort of tell that story without feeling like, am I some sort of a failure, that I'm doing a lot of different, that I'm sort of a gig economy type of guy, like doing a ton of different gigs. And I've had to kind of get over that in my own ego and just accept it, because it is. And you're saying that I'm successful. I don't, every morning I wake up and think, I need more clients. So I'm thank you for, I'm not, thankfully, knock on wood, in trouble right now, but I certainly could always be, I'm always looking for some new sources of revenue. So that's the answer.
That was a great answer.
We asked you to tell us about you and your life and your career meltdown.
It melted.
It required all the words.
It melted. And I should say, I think Dana said that I was laid off once. I've been laid off 4 times in the last 10 years. I had never been laid off at all until I was 40 years old. So I had never even thought that would ever even be a possibility. And now I'm finding out that so many of my friends and peers are being laid off. So I used to be so embarrassed about that, and it used to be such a humiliation, because it was never about my job performance. It was just because my job became obsolete at the various companies. They're trying to cut costs, and so anyway, I think there's nothing wrong with being laid off. We're all getting laid off, not just our generation, by the way, as I found out from my article. A lot of millennials too.
It's not just us.
Yeah.
No, I think what's interesting, your word is, in my mind anyways, is multi-hyphenate.
Yeah.
And mine is that we are bellwethers.
Mm.
And we remember a time when getting laid off would have been almost unthinkable. Just, you had a career like our parents or our fathers mostly, and that was what you did. and you worked for a company and you had a pension and there was a sense of stability
Yeah.
and a sense of I am a blank. I'm a dentist. I am, whatever it is you do. And we don't have it the worst, but we have it first. Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
that's an awful rhyme, but it's true that, yeah, when I first started career, the idea of getting laid off was like, that wouldn't happen. I was an honors student. Like,
Right.
I wouldn't get laid
Right.
off.
I
Are you
work hard.
crazy?
Yeah.
I work hard and I'm smart. And it, especially working in technology, but I mean, any field, it's now a norm, and we had to come realize it was a norm, right? Like it wasn't a norm when we first started in career, but millennials and Gen Zs on down, like they will never know another world, I don't think, where a CEO blinks and is like, oh, we need to butts and seats, delete 5% of our butts and seats,
Mm.
make a spreadsheet and sort them by who's highest paid and get rid of them. I have been told before, at least at one of the companies that did layoffs, that was how they did it. They
Yeah.
took a spreadsheet and just sorted by salaries. So yeah, Gen X is not first. Or sorry, we're not the worst, but we are here first, and we're getting close to. We can at least see retirement age pretty clearly in the front view mirror, and are like, how is that
How's that
going to
gonna work?
happen?
Right.
Given where we are right now, and especially now that we're facing this like complete economic chaos of the new regime we're living under. It is daunting, and as the latchkey drank from the outside hose stereotypic Gen X tropes, we're more resilient. So maybe it's good that we're the ones on the front lines because, you know, adaptation is our middle name. But just listening to you telling all those stories of all the careers you've been in, Jonathan, like I'm tired.
Mhm.
Even though I've
It's
had to listen to your
exhausting.
path, I'm like, it's
It is
exhausting.
exhausting.
It is exhausting. And you know, the idea of like you keep having to reinvent yourself, it sounds very, very tiring. And when I think back on it, I'm like, oh, that sounds exhausting. But it wasn't really like that. I don't think it has to be like that for people where you just have to keep saying, well, now I'm going to be a this. Again, that's old Gen X thinking. It's like, no, I'll take this job and see if I like it, and then I'll take this other job. And it sort of doesn't have to be like an all or nothing kind of decision. But I think that we are wired in such a way that we sort of think like, okay, now I'm a this, like I was a journalist, now I'm a
Right.
podcaster. And this is like everything but
Right.
it's not, I guess what I'm learning, and I'm learning as I go here. I don't, know what the hell's going on, but it's like one day I'm a podcaster and then the next day I'm a corporate, like thought leader, ghostwriter. And then the next day I seem to be, I don't know, like teaching writing classes online. Like, so these are all the different things that I'm doing, and it just sort of cobbling it together. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm also saying that sort of the old way of thinking about it is not going to serve us, at
Right.
least, for
Right.
the next 10
And
years or so.
you
Yeah.
said
It's
something.
interesting
Oh, sorry. You
because,
go first, Lawrence.
well, it's just, Jonathan, what you're saying really resonates with me, and I'm living it in the moment. I literally just last night had the conversation with my family. We went out to dinner, and I was like, I think it's really dawning on me that I'm never going to have just one job
Yeah.
again. Like, the days of being like, oh, I'm an e-commerce production manager for a large company, and that's the entirety of what I do. Like, that's just over.
Right.
And the rest of my life is going to be I do these 10 things in varying amounts, and day to day or week to week the percentages may change. you know a friend of ours recently suggested that I should be a Santa Claus over the holiday season because
I
good
wonder why.
Santas actually make like $8,000 a week
Oh my,
or something. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, you know what, I'll
why not?
hello world,
It,
gay Jewish Santa Claus.
it'd be made for great
Congratulations.
copy, right? I mean, it could be a great, and that's the other thing is that taking what you do and trying to make it like different streams of income off of it, right? So it's like I have this
Right.
podcast, but I also, repurpose it on Substack. Not that I'm making a ton of money on Substack yet, but like being able to kind of multi-purpose the stuff that you put out in the world. Yeah.
Well, right, and I think that's the insight, right? Is that maybe what we can do is find things that are similar enough or weird enough that you can kind of glom them together and say like, oh yeah, I'm the Substack podcaster who plays Santa Claus over
Yeah.
the Christmas season, right?
Right.
In addition to, whatever else I've got going
Watch out,
on.
David
And those
Sedaris.
things maybe become self-reinforcing.
Sorry, I talked over you.
Yeah.
Watch out, David Sedaris. The Santa Land Diaries Part 2 coming soon from Lauren
Exactly.
Suderman. I mean, that was
Right. Hello, David.
that was his story, right? He was poor. He was an elf in Santa Land because he's more elf stature and you're
Yep.
more Santa stature. And he wrote about it and found his way. That's a very Gen X story, although he might be a boomer. I'm not sure. He's very funny.
I think he's a boomer.
I think he is too.
I
But
had
he has some
I had
Gen
the
X-y,
opportunity.
like, oh, did you meet him? Did you meet him? I heard I had the opportunity.
I met his husband. We have mutual friends, so yeah. But I know that he's one of these people who has had a career that is so enviable to so many people, and I feel like it kind of it's great for him, but also like not realistic for a lot of us. But I love that he. I think he really makes most of his money touring around the country or the world, basically. He lives in France. Or does he live in London? I can't remember.
He was in
I think they live in
France or
London.
one of his
London.
Paris, I think.
Paris, yeah. And just, speaking and getting, so I think there's something to be learned from that. Like you can, maybe doing what you do, you can get some speaking engagements, et
GenXy
cetera.
on
So
the road.
anyway. Exactly. Take it on the road, right? There is an appetite for what you and I'm doing. You and me are doing. About
and
now, I
I.
should have my grammar. You and I. Thank you. You and I are
it's we.
doing in that.
We
You know,
is I, yeah.
people want answers. I mean, this is kind of uncharted territory we're going into. And I'm just sort of again figuring it out as I go and talking to lots of my peers and some experts and my shrink ad nauseum, and it's all kind of happening kind of quickly. Like I didn't think this was going to be what I would be talking about, 5 years ago. And like suddenly here I am on this podcast saying like, hey, this is what I've been doing. And I was doing it as survival, right? I mean, I've got 2 kids.
Right.
One's in private school in high school and one's going to college in London. So I can't really afford to just, experiment with writing a book and seeing how that, I've got to do a lot of things.
Right.
At least not now.
Yeah.
Right.
It'll be
I love that was possibly the most Gen Xy answer, like LA Gen Xy answer. My therapist and I agree that what I'm doing is
yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
I'm
Yeah,
actually writing
it is.
notes so I don't forget.
And my wife's a therapist.
Oh my gosh, really? That's funny.
Yeah.
Not your
Nice.
therapist though, right?
But she was a
'Cause that
chef.
rare.
It's the thing about my wife that's really tricky is that when I married her, she was a chef, and I was like, "Oh, cool! I'm marrying a chef," and now I've got a shrink, and it's like now she analyzes me, and it just wasn't. It's not fair.
Does she still cook?
she was
for you,
actually-
though? She still does she?
No. I mean, she does. She gets mad when I say no. Sorry, honey. No, she does cook for me, but I'm definitely become more of the chef in the house because she just doesn't really enjoy cooking. It's just not something that gives her great pleasure, which is probably why she gave up being a chef. And also, she at one time was Elon Musk's private chef, and I think that's kind of given her a bad taste in her mouth, so to speak.
and then
Yeah.
Oof.
Anyway, but that was 15 years ago before everything changed.
Before he went crazy. It was as crazy.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch
Yeah.
on a couple things you said. Look at me, I'm actually like old school taking notes.
I love you.
So
You're-
I don't go
it's
back.
super
forget
cool.
to go back because my memory is.
I think
was
we're the last
short.
generation that uses pens. Do you think we're the last generation that uses pens and pencils? I think we may be.
maybe,
Yeah.
except for the artists of
Yeah,
the
except-
millennials
right.
and Gen Z,
Yeah.
but
I still write
I
stuff
mean,
down.
how
It's
many
embarrassing.
pens do you have around you right now? I've easily got 100 pens
Yeah,
around
and I
me.
tell when
you know?
I'm taking notes, I still write it down. I don't have the instinct like that my kids would have to put it on their notes app or whatever.
Pull out your phone.
Yeah,
Right, exactly. Yeah, my first instinct is where's paper? I need
And
to
also when
write it
people
down.
read, like I notice, like when people read speeches and stuff, they read off their phone. I never do that. I never read stuff off my phone. I always have it typed out or printed. I don't know. It's just a generational. thing.
Generational thing. But here's another
It's thrown me
thing.
off.
There were 2 questions that I had for you, Jonathan, that were when you were talking in your intro statement. You had said something about promotion, and I don't like to talk about that very much. I think part of being this multi-hyphenate gig economy Substacker podcaster is you have to be very comfortable, or at least fake it, with, hey, come watch me. I'm like, you have to write your notes on Substack and tell people when you're doing things and sort of be like, hey, I have 5 paid subscribers now. Cheer me on. And that's a very
Yep.
like eye roll Gen X thing, right? Like I work in
Very.
marketing.
That's such a good
I
point.
will do it, but I think it is our first language to eye roll and be like, if you're talented, you don't have to self promote, right? It will just come to you.
Yeah.
And that's a lie we were fed, or that we made up, maybe, that like things don't come to you just because you're talented. I mean, maybe they did to David Sedaris, but that's a one off.
Right. If you work hard, everything will happen. No,
Right.
unfortunately, that is not.
No. And
It's the biggest
so
lie being.
that
Yeah.
that was one thing that I was like, wow, I think that's an area where we have to adapt and sort of ignore our eye rolling instincts and go ahead and be like, you should really listen to what I'm doing because I think it's cool, and to be okay with that. And the other one is, until less than 2 years ago when I joined Medium, I had my one job, and I only had my one job. And part of it was maybe fear based, and maybe sort of old school training, and maybe part legal, of like, if I do more than one thing, I'll lose my job, because I'm not, my job is my job, and you're not allowed to make money doing other stuff when you have a job, or they're going to get mad. I still
Yeah.
don't have on my LinkedIn anything that I do other than my one career job, because I don't feel like I should, And do you think that's a Gen X ethos that we're having to now pivot on? Because I know once my first day on Medium, I made 27 cents, I think 39 cents. And I was like, oh
Mm.
my God, I just made money as a writer. And then that, quickly grew to where I was like, oh, this will hit me at tax time. Like, it wasn't not enough to make a living, but enough to make an impact. And I was like, I'm going to be, A of all, I'm going to be in trouble, but B of all, it really came true of like, Dana, you should never rely on just your employer for your income, because your employer can get rid of you at any time and for any reason, regardless of how hard you
Yeah.
work. And that's been a really hard shift for me. And I'm wondering if either of you have had a hard time kind of embracing that. I mean, I know you don't have a big day job now, but what was the process like of coming to, no, I'm supposed to have one job that takes care of everything, to this sense of, I never can rely on just one thing ever again? Was that a process?
Lawrence, do you want to take that? No, I mean,
Well, honestly, my first reaction listening to Dana say it was, maybe I finally made that shift in my head, because as you were articulating it, Dana, I was like, oh God, that's such a boomer or silent generation way of thinking about things. And I don't want to make everything about generational
Yeah.
warfare, but
right.
I think maybe I finally hit the point where I'm like, oh God, no, we can never, to your final point, Dana, we can never just rely on one thing
Mm.
anymore. What may have been the programming we were given by our parents just can't be true anymore, isn't
No.
true. So yeah, Jonathan, I'm dying to hear
Yeah,
what you have to say
and
about
also
it.
the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is there's ageism, right? So,
Oof.
I
Yes.
when I first lost my job, my last kind of full-time job. And by the way, during that job paid so well, I shouldn't say paid so poorly. The job didn't pay me enough to really support my family. So I was already kind of taking side gigs to supplement. But I started doing what I always did, which is like go on LinkedIn and start sending my resume to these different, things and jobs that sounded like they might be up my alley. And I would be lucky if I even got a response. I mean, this was months of this, right? Like, and really taking the time with the cover letters and
Oh,
and
yes.
at a certain point, I can't prove this, obviously, but I just felt like I mean, I can't be less qualified than I have to. I mean, especially when I would be applying for like some sort of editorial job. I mean, I've worked at, an editorial for 25 years. And again, I was even afraid to say that in my cover letter, like a 25-year veteran,
Mm-mm.
because I would worry that would make me sound like an old man, right? But I obviously
Right.
I had the experience to do these jobs, and I know it, and I still believe I do. But I also know that I'm just not going to get those jobs anymore. I mean, they're probably out there. They're very different than they used to be. I mean, I did finally become an editor in chief. My last job, full time job, was a magazine called Green Entrepreneur, which was a cannabis business magazine from entrepreneur.com. It was like they decided they wanted to get into the cannabis business, not the business, but the business of talking about cannabis. And it was like this incredible, like finally I had a print, they actually made a print magazine, like a glossy print magazine that was distributed all over the country. And it was like, wow, this is my dream job. And guess I had a staff of 2 people. Like this, I was basically doing everything that I did 20 years earlier for except that I wasn't in charge at that time. I was like second in command. And I had this dream job, and it wasn't even the same thing anyway. It was like we used to have a staff of 80 people, and now there was two of us doing kind of the same thing, which was insane. I don't know who was more right, the staff of 80 or the staff of two, but somehow like both models are so different than each other. Anyway, the point being that I realized that even the jobs that I really, really wanted and thought would be full-time weren't really what I thought they would be or what they were back in the day. And so, yeah, I mean, Dana, I think there's another thing that we do, and I don't know if this is a Gen X thing or if this is just a me thing or maybe, is that we tend to feel like we tend to put a lot of capital in like the name, like working for like a established company,
yes.
right? Like working for eBay or I would always say, oh, I work at Entrepreneur Magazine. Like, and there was, rather than saying, oh, I'm a freelance journalist or whatever it is that you say, or rather I run my own podcasting company. Because in my mind, and it took me a long time to deprogram myself, saying I run a deep broadcast company sounds like I'm a bit of like a failure. Like, but saying I work for Entrepreneur in like an established company, and it's somehow like that made me like that was a status, like a higher status. And it's a silly thing, and it might be a me thing. I don't know if it's a generational thing. But like it took me a long time.
It's not a you thing.
Right? Okay, talk about that. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's not a me
I
thing.
don't even think that's a Gen X thing. I think we have it.
Right.
But, I mean, if you go on LinkedIn, you see so many people in their, you get like a few words at the top to describe yourself, and it will say, Amazon X Microsoft. Like, it's so
Yeah.
important to have the name that even when you're no longer there, it's still the very
Right.
first thing that they want.
Exactly. I talk about the New York, that I'm a
Guilty.
published New York
100%
Times,
guilty of that.
I've had 3 articles in the New York Times. I still say that I'm a New York Times, writer, rather than just, I mean, I've had much more, I'm written a book, I mean, there's much things I've done that are much more impressive than writing for the New York Times. But yeah, I just think, because I think that catches the eye of the
It does.
people. And I don't know if that's true. It does it?
Yes,
I don't know.
it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does,
Well,
I think.
Okay.
And it does, and also it's an interesting thing to ponder, right? Because if you're saying like, "Oh, Microsoft," well, sure, maybe you're a janitor at Microsoft,
Right.
but it's the cachet of the name.
cachet.
Whereas, you're the CEO of your podcasting company, and that, it's interesting how we value the name of the place we're working over the actual role that we're performing there.
Yeah, and I think that was what resonated me with what you were saying, Dana, about how you haven't changed your LinkedIn in a while to reflect all the other things you're doing. I just this week changed my LinkedIn. I had at the top of there, I still had my entrepreneur job, like because I felt like anybody who saw my resume might think that I, was, like wasn't. I thought that had the highest status of all the things I've done in the last 5 years. And I just changed it because I feel like, no, that's not what I'm doing now. Doesn't tell the story of who I am. And right now I have this consulting company. I guess it's a consultant company, you could call it that does basically multimedia projects. And it's taken me a long time to even figure out how to word this because like you said, when you're a multi-hyphenate, it's hard to put it into like one LinkedIn thing. But it's like, I create content in various platforms for people. I make videos for people. I make audio podcasts, video podcasts. I write for them. So, but it took me a while to put that on the top of my resume because I was afraid that would look like it wasn't be impressive enough or something. And I think we have to sort of get over that no matter what age we are, because by the way, if you're successful at it, it shouldn't matter. And, and so I'm just sort of trying to train my brain in the way I look at the world in a different way. And again, I don't know if a millennial looking at your resume sees that and says, oh, well, he just works for himself. He's like his own entrepreneur. I don't want that guy. I don't know, but
Right. Or maybe that's cool.
Maybe it's
because
cool.
That is kind of an up and coming.
Exactly.
Right?
Being an entrepreneur
There
is
are all
cool.
these stories about millennial and Gen Z, MBA students who are turning down the offers from the big corporations and finding something that is niche that they can be the CEO of early, or
Exactly.
be a power player in early.
And
so,
I guess it's about not
who
chasing
knows?
the shiny thing anymore. Like the shiny thing is probably not going to be in your grasp, at this point.
Right.
I don't know if Amazon and Microsoft are hiring, first time, 55-year-olds. I'm not sure. I would be, and it's not fair, but it just might be the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to interject and say, before we move on to a different topic, Jonathan, when you were talking about being the editor-in-chief of Green Entrepreneur Magazine, I had a little, like, mini fantasy film in my head of, like, what if that had been in the Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter era, of, well, we need you to go on $100,000 junket
Exactly.
to Bolivia, to this boutique weed growing farm to get these beautiful photos of,
That's what it
sticky
would have
buds
been.
in their natural environment.
And unfortunately, I lived in that era and did get to do those kind of fancy trips and got to live that life to some degree. Never was paid a tremendous amount to do it, but it was certainly glamorous. But I've sort of
Right.
given up on the sort of glamour jobs, so to literally, because I don't work at Glamour anymore. But those glamour jobs really had a lot of appeal to me when I was in my 30s. I mean, why wouldn't they? It was true. I would get to go out here and interview Snoop Dogg, or I say out here because I live in LA and it was when I was living in New York. But they would send me to interview very famous people, and it was very glamorous.
Very Sex and the City.
Those days are.
Very.
It was very. I was Carrie Bradshaw for sure, male Carrie Bradshaw.
And just like that, the career evaporated.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
couldn't help
Now
but-
look at her.
I couldn't help but wonder. Sorry, we've been watching. My teens are obsessed with that show, so we've been watching it a lot.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I've
So is mine.
I've never seen the whole thing through. Yeah, I just saw a think piece about how Carrie Bradshaw is having a resurgence with Gen Zs because she's the ultimate
That's so
main
interesting.
character syndrome character, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
because the series is her point of view, even when it's about her friends. And for a while, people
Yeah.
were kind of knocking her, and now Gen Zs have. Because it was released on Netflix, and
Well, that's encouraging that Gen Z, because to me, she's so of the epitome of our generation, right? Or she kind of is a symbol of our generation. Maybe they'll bring back print magazines, and then we'll all be
Right.
in good shape. Or or print. I don't know. It's interesting that they have nostalgia for the things that we
right,
grew up with.
and it's so striking to watch the show because at the very beginning they don't have cell phones. Then they start having them, but just a little. And I swear I may be wrong on this. I have to check the years, but there's no Botox at the beginning. And by the end of the show, you can see that their expressions don't move as much. They've all gotten their forehead. Their
that's
foreheads are
interesting.
less wrinkled. I swear, I may be wrong, but I think I see that in the show. And I don't know if you could rock the Manolos, but maybe, Jonathan, you're going to have to if you're Carrie Bradshaw. Be
Well, for years I did write. I was when that show was popular. I was assigned something called Diary of He from Redbook magazine, and I guess it was a time when blogs were just starting, and it was basically pretending to be Carrie. It was basically the opposite. It was a fictional diary that I had to write every week of this guy that was living in the city, that was basically dating, and like he was a bad boy basically.
Ooh.
And it was interesting because I did it for 2 or 3 years. And people kind of thought it was a real person. Like I would do these, like ask him anythings, and everybody would be yelling at me, like, "How could you have dumped?" I'm like, "I didn't do anything. I'm just this character that I created." But it was funny. And then when I came to Hollywood, I tried to sell that idea as a TV show, but it never really went anywhere. But it was because it's somehow not as it's somehow a more obnoxious when it's a guy being that person. It didn't resonate as much. I think it's like
Yes.
nobody wanted to watch a guy Carrie Bradshaw.
Right, because
Yeah.
Carrie.
Well, honestly, I mean, a male main character, narcissistic.
Yeah.
That's not as innovative as it
Right.
when it's Carrie
and
Bradshaw.
promiscuous.
It's true.
I mean, that show was. I
Yeah.
tried to explain this to my kids of like, you can't imagine how novel it was at the time to have a show where it was 30-something women who were sort of older, very frank about their sexuality on a mainstream TV show. That was very new. And now looking at the sorts of things that they're like, ooh, 3-ways, or everything seems dated in that. Like things have moved so
Yeah.
fast. Like the world has changed so quickly on the dating front that my kids have a hard time seeing what was so eye-opening about that show. And honestly, watching the Samantha and Richard plotline, and she couldn't deal with him cheating on her, I was like, these days they would have been probably a
Encouraging.
married non-monogamous couple, and that would have
Yeah.
been fine.
An ethical non-monogamy
Yes,
or whatever you call
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Right. Exploring polyamory.
I don't
right.
even
Yep.
think they would have been polyamorous, but they both just like to fuck around a lot. And her response to meeting him was, "Now I want monogamy," and he tries and fails. And I'm like, why would I hate that whole plot line, because I was like, why would Samantha want monogamy? And she became this like insipid, jealous character that is completely antithetical to who she was. So I was like, oh yeah, nowadays they'd read Esther Perel and be like, okay, well, we're really committed to each other and are in love, and also we're both gonna have these adventures.
Right.
It seems very like the writers didn't know what to do
Yeah.
with Samantha falling for someone, and now
Sometimes-
there would have been
yeah,
so many
sometimes-
more options. Should write.
I know that show couldn't work now because I mean, just the idea of yeah, it's just it seems a lot of those shows just seem so dated. And
They do,
and
but
I even look back at Diary of He, and it's like, wow, I don't think I could resell unless it was done as a retro kind of thing. Like this is what it was like to date in the early 90s.
Yep.
Yeah.
It,
People are probably interested in reading about.
nowadays they probably are. It is interesting that it resonates so much. But I did have one other question for you here. Retake. I don't know why I just lost my words there. I had one other question related to what you were referencing earlier. And I think this is, you mentioned something about this in the original article of yours I read, that you were like, Gen Zers are off making a killing being makeup influencers or something on TikTok. Do you think Gen X, can we make our livings as content creators? Do you think that that is an exclusively young person thing, or is there space for older people to have opinions on the internet and truly make a living just being mouthy people on the internet? Because I want that job.
I do too. I think it depends on the platform.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there are some Gen Xers on TikTok, that are doing okay.
Right.
But I wouldn't start there because that's not our platform. Actually, the platform that you are watching this podcast on, I think, is a Substack. I mean, this is the one I discovered. I sort of accidentally, and I think we probably both accidentally have stumbled upon Substack as being like, oh wow, there's a lot of people like me on this platform. I mean, there used to be a lot of people like us I noticed on Facebook, but now Facebook is toxic and nobody really wants to be on Facebook anymore and support Facebook, right? So it seems like
only your grandma's on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. Now only, but it's interesting. Every generation has a different way of communicating with each other, and so I think there. So the answer to your question is, yes, I think it's very possible to be a content creator, but you have to find where your audience is going to be. And I think just me looking at the landscape, and again, this is just, I have no statistics to back this up, but it seems like Substack and podcasting seem to be two venues, and maybe you combine them, and like we're doing here, places where there are a lot of people that would be interested in what we have to say. But it's kind of like know your lane. Like I wouldn't want to go and make makeup videos. That would be insane. Even if I was a makeup artist and talent, maybe there's something people our age want to get makeup tips for people our age. But anyway, I do think there is, I think of some of the people that I listen to, and they're like my age. I mean, people like Sam Harris, right? Like you guys know Sam Harris, right? I get confused. Sam Harris and Dan Harris. Sam Harris is making sense. And then Dan Harris, the ABC, he's a good example of a Gen X guy who kind of did an interesting content creation. So you guys know him, right? He was the 10% happier guy.
I don't
right?
know
So
him.
he was an ABC anchor. He had a panic attack on air, kind of like broadcast news where you start sweating and you can watch it. And it damaged his career. It meant that he could never be like an anchor. Like he was kind of like maybe like groomed to be the next like Peter Jennings or something. And they now at that point knew that he could never be an anchor. And I don't really know, I don't know the full story, but what he ended up doing is as a side hustle, he got really into mindfulness and meditation, and he started talking a lot about that. And then eventually he put, I don't know if it was a book first or a podcast first, but his podcast is all about kind of using mindfulness or using, more kind of spiritual methods to improve your life and things. It's completely different than what he was doing at ABC News, but he still has a great, radio voice. But he's a really good example of somebody who's a content creator, who's doing the content he wants to do. He's very successful at it. And so I look at somebody like a Dan Harris and I think you could. I think it has to be on the right platform, and it also has to be something that you feel like it has to be really you. The cliche of social media, but it is really true, is that it has to be authentic. And it really, I've now worked with so many different influencers and just in my jobs, and I realize that the ones that kind of push are actually truly themselves, or at least appear to be themselves. That is very important, and it helps if what you're putting out in the world is something you actually are really interested in and believe in,
That's
rather
the
than
full
trying to
quote
fake
right
it.
there.
Right. So
grab that.
if you find your thing,
Let's hope Descript finds that one, because that was really good.
grab it.
I know.
That's the clip. We got it, folks. We're done.
Yes, I'm done. Yeah. So and it's interesting, this whole experience that I'm having on Substack. This is an example. So I've been on Substack longer than you guys,
really
right? I think because you guys are pretty new to Substack. I know, Dana, you've been doing
2
Medium.
months.
Yeah. And I have been on Substack for a while because I was always using it to promote my podcast. And I the stories would get like 5 or 6 likes. I had like, I don't know, 600, eventually 500 subscribers or something. but it was never like, it was just a pain. Like I was like, oh God, I got to write another story that nobody's going to respond to, that won't make me like it just, and then I was like, oh, maybe I'll try to figure out a subscription model. Then I write this article on Gen X and my response to the New York Times article, and it just kind of blows up. And I'm like, wow, maybe I've kind of stumbled onto something here. Like I'm super interested in writing about this stuff. Like this is something I talk about all the time. I think about all the time. And it's interesting. I don't know where this is going to go. I mean, but you know, it's like, I think it's kind of like you're throwing a lot of stuff at the wall. And I think that, you know, again, I don't know, this might be who knows, in 3 months I might be like, oh, that Gen X thing, that was interesting, but I couldn't really, but I'm already thinking like, how am I like, I have a lot to say on this topic. Like, and so do you guys, right? And it's like, how do I meet more people like you and talk more about this and get this message out there more?
I didn't realize.
So,
sorry, Jonathan, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I
just think it's,
jump in there and say, I didn't realize that was your first like big article on Substack. Yes.
That was my first hit. Yeah, that was like my first hit. Like I wrote one article about anxiety that did okay, and because it was promoted by this guy Rob Henderson, who's a big Substacker. So, but you know, I think it has like 40 likes, you know, or 40 hearts or whatever you call them on sub 40 stacks. And again, and it was nice. It was a nice little ego boost, but it wasn't like, you know, this was like, holy mackerel. And then I wrote another one, and that one got a lot. And now every time I see, and suddenly I have more subscribers and people are more interested. And so I don't know, I guess the point of that story was that kind of do what you're interested in and see what happens, in addition to just doing stuff that you're going to make money. Because I would say that a lot of the things that I do to make money are not separately things I'm passionate about, but it's just like, no, that's how I'm going to make money and put the kids through college, right?
Lawrence and I,
it's the pragmatic stuff.
GenXy with some intent, and some intent we're figuring out along the way, but it's clear your story and then one in the New York Times before it, like, people are finally starting to talk about us because we've been the butt of the joke of the ignored generation, and we don't necessarily agree with the way Gen X is being framed. I mean, historically, you know, you'd find things that were like, OMG, Cyndi Lauper and Madonna, and like just nostalgic, silly stuff. But now there are actual real think pieces of like how we're moving the world. And we don't think they're getting the story quite right. And we don't just want to, like with GenXy, our hope, our lofty ambition is not just that we counter these stories, but that we are thought leaders and are showing the world a way. And with that in mind, I feel like a good question to feel like we're sort of at the climax or denouement of this podcast is like, what advice?
Uh-oh.
Well, I want to hear what yours is, because I had a next thing too. So I want to hear yours, Dana. I was about to say
climaxing together, but ew, I'm not going to delete that. Ew.
Sunday morning.
What advice would you each have for a fellow Gen Xer who has been laid off and has sent, you know, X hundreds of resumes out there and is just not getting responses and is struggling with what happens next in their career?
Well, Jonathan, I'll let you go first.
I think, you know, take baby steps, not big swings. I mean, it's okay. You know, again, it's kind of just reiterating what we've been saying throughout this conversation, that it's okay. You might not find the next big thing right away, you know, and I'm not still counting out that I might get a call tomorrow from some magazine saying, hey, John, we want you to be editor-in-chief. And I wouldn't be like, no, I don't do that anymore. I'm a multi-hyphenate. You know, of course, if it's a good job, I'm going to take it. Right. But don't expect that your next big, that you're going to have a next big thing. You know, you have to, you know, take steps, like contact some people, you know, and you know, first of all, just write down, I like to just kind of write down what I want to be doing. And then what I, you know, in one column, and then write down, you know, what I can do, you know, what I can offer, you know, well, I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster, so all these different things. And then I started just, I felt like the best throughout my career, most of my good jobs kind of came through referrals anyway. It was always people, you know, that I knew through work. It wasn't like, oh, I answered a resume, you know, answered an ad. And I did get a few jobs through like Media Bistro and stuff over the years, but mostly it was referrals. So again, call people, you know, don't be embarrassed to say you got laid off, because at this point everybody's getting laid off. So you can say that without any kind of shame, and just say, you know, I'm just looking for, you know, wondered if you had any ideas from, you know, or had any, you know, leads or anything about, you know, just doing freelance stuff, maybe even putting it that way. Take people out to coffee, have conversations. One bit of advice that I heard from this woman, Joanne Lippman, who wrote a book about, I had her on my podcast recently. She wrote a book about change and transitions in your life at a later period. And she said, sometimes it's hard to figure out yourself what your next move should be, but ask your friends, like say, ask people you know or you trust, oh, wait, what do you see me doing? Like, what do you think I'm good at? Because sometimes hearing it from some other person is kind of, eye-opening, right? Like, because it's hard to adjudicate yourself. Like, sometimes you need other people to say, I think you're like a really good manager. You've always, whatever it is, like they might tell you that. So ask that question. Don't be afraid to ask that question. I'm sure there's a ton more I could advise. And that's kind of what I sort of feel like we are, both of us, GenXy and Small Talk, or whatever. By the way, I'm thinking about renaming and I someday will ask you guys about your opinion about what to rename it. But I think that not only do I want to set the record straight about what GenX is, but I do want to offer actionable advice to people like us, because it's not out there in the media right now. There's a lot of articles about how we're like how everything is falling apart and we're fucked, basically. That's a very sexy article to write right now. But nobody's writing the article about like, well, what do you do? Like, you still have 10, 15 years, good 15 years in you, and you might still be working. And given the fact that like our 401ks are going to be disappearing and you might still be working into your 70s. And like, what do you do? And so that's the article I want to read. That's the content I want to. And so I'm kind of on a journey to find that answer out and help people get the answer. So my answer right now to you is probably going to be much better in even 5 weeks, because I'll have already kind of gained, have done a ton of research on this and talked to more people about it.
Yeah, it makes so much sense to me, Jonathan. And the thing that you said about, don't take any big swings right away. I love that. And I'm kind of instantly mapping it onto, the things that I'm doing right now. And one of the things, maybe it sounds silly, but I've set up a little Shopify storefront to sell really snarky, vulgar political tees, right? Like all the signs that you see at the rallies, like,
That's
I
great.
called Trump a cunt, but he lacks warmth and depth, like I was like, that should be a t-shirt.
That's awesome.
And and what's interesting is that's not a big swing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's literally cost me, I don't know, $10, right? Because Shopify is having a deal and Printful is having a deal, and the piece of that equation that would be expensive would be the, the designer to kind of do all the typography layout, and the web designer and the content developer, and the online marketer, and that's me.
Yeah.
That's everything that I've done in my career. And so, I basically created a hobby for myself that is free, that hasn't cost me hardly any money to get up and running, and I'm, still waiting for like the lightning to strike and someone to be like, oh my God, Alpaca Lunch has the best snarky t-shirts I've ever seen. Everyone go buy them, but like, it's a thing.
It's a thing. It's like using your skill set. It's something you're interested in. It's funny. It's fun for you. And again, that might not be the thing that's going to like, you're going to write your,
totally.
But it could be a thing. It could be one side. The big thing in Gen Z is side hustles right now. Like, everybody's got a side hustle. Why can't we have side hustles?
Right
now. And side hustles for our side hustles, right?
Yeah, exactly. The most popular stories in entrepreneur were always the side hustles, by far. Like, that is a thing. And I think that generation understands, I think, better than we do, that it's not about one thing anymore. In fact, they don't even stay at jobs for like more than 4 months, right? Like, they keep moving on. We were like, you would never quit a job. Like, you'd be insane, unless it was like a terrible situation. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interestingly, in my career in Seattle in tech, there was a period of time in like the early 2000s where every time a contract ended, it was just the easiest thing in the world. Like, I was constantly getting requests. They were always for more money than I had just made on my previous contract.
Right.
And, for that, like, I don't know, 5-year period, it was like my career accelerator, where I, went from making a paltry sum of money to a really decent salary, because I was just sort of taking the next thing that came along. But those times are clearly over, and I don't know there's ever going to be a time like that again for us or for millennials or Gen Z folks. I think it's always going to be side hustles upon side hustles kind of thing.
Yeah, and it does sound exhausting, especially if you're on the other side of it and not really doing it. But I'm not that exhausted, and in fact, I feel like I have a lot more freedom than I used to have, and I don't have to deal with I mean, I've had a lot of really douchebaggy bosses in the last 10 years. I have to say, I don't know what it is. I just had a bad run there. Um, and it's kind of like, yeah, I still have clients that might be a little bit difficult, but like, I don't have to, like, they're not, I don't have to go and be with them in the office now every single day and have to, so there's a lot of trade-offs. And, there's good and bad, but I think a lot of the responses I was getting in my article is like, it sounds hard. It sounds like, oh, that sounds exhausting to keep. I don't know how exhausted I am. I mean, I'm working hard, and I have to say my vacation, I just took a vacation. It was a little tricky to have a vacation when you don't have one job, because people, even though you tell everybody you're going away, there's, you're where the buck stops with a lot of these things. And like, people need stuff. And so that part was a little tricky because, but like, Dana, what you were describing is so what we used to call what we call the golden handcuffs, right? It's like,
I'm grateful to have
that
them.
was what, right? Still have them. And that there's a reason they're handcuffs because it's really hard to do creative things when you had that full-time job thing happening. And so sometimes they are handcuffs. So anyway, the golden part I get, but we have to also remember that they're handcuffs,
I know.
right?
Jonathan,
so the grass
isn't
is
it
always
wild
greener.
trying
I don't know is
to
what I'm saying.
launch one's almost adult children into the world, and like how and we didn't even talk about AI.
It's so
which
weird.
That can be another conversation, but like how to.
That was going to be my next, like, honestly, I don't know that we have time that we can
we can come
cover
back
it
for our
because the
AI
topic's so
conversation,
big.
because I'm a Gen Xer that, and I'm sure with you guys both being in tech, I mean, I spend an inordinate amount of time like working in AI, trying to learn about AI. Like, I'm not running away from it. AI does not scare me. I'm amazed at how many of my peers are like, oh my God, like, I don't understand. I don't like it. It's like, so whatever, like, especially writers have a real problem with it. And I get it. Like, it's a little scary,
Yeah.
but my goodness, this is like here to stay. You'd be insane to not understand how to use it and work and use it as
the only way to make yourself valuable, is, I think, to be the person who understands AI and can maybe bridge between here's how we used to do it and here's how we do it with AI.
Yeah. And I got my first, who knows? I don't even know how they found me, but like, I'm going to be speaking to a magazine company. This is like weird full circle thing about using AI in the editorial room. And it's like just like an hour seminar or whatever. But I'm like, that's interesting. Like, I just think that there is something to be gained from embracing that technology, because I think there's some quote about, it's not that AI will replace us; it will replace the people who don't know how to work with AI. Like, right. And it reminds me a little bit. The analogy is, to me, is like all the people in print that were saying, "Oh, web is like .com," like that. Again, that's for the B list. Like, amateur is like, print is where it's at, and then web comes along, and you're just like, "Holy crap! I've got to do digital stuff now." And so I don't want to be that guy. I want to be ahead of it. So my advice to anybody out there is like, learn about AI. It's not like, and I don't feel like AI is something like TikTok where it's like only the domain of like Gen Zers. Like, it's we're kind of coming up at the same time with it. And I think we can learn it just as fast as they can.
I have a lot of thoughts there, but I'm going to save that for a different podcast.
Anyway. Yeah, let's do an AI. There's so many AI. I could talk about AI, and I'd love to hear how you guys use AI. And
we should schedule a follow up, on your podcast or back here.
For sure.
Or live, and see what people think.
Let me do a live, and I'll bring you guys on. And yes, okay. You guys, awesome. You hear the creative thing happening in real time here. I don't know if you're going to cut this part out, but
no, I don't want to cut this part out, because this is literally how it happens.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's not sausage making. It's let 1,000 ideas bloom.
We'll talk about that once we hang up. Oh yeah. No, you're coming with us.
Oh, really?
Jonathan.
You guys must be exhausted.
Assuming you have time, you're coming with us.
Well, assuming Jonathan has time. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm going on. I forgot.
Excuse me,
I'm coming on.
We got to talk about, we ask every guest of our very limited list of guests, the others have been live, you are here on a recording, about what you think the most GenXy song of all time is. And I know we talked about this on your podcast, Jonathan, and you told me you're about to release you're about to release an article, so you're beating us to the punch. But I think your article is a Gen X anthem, where ours is more a Gen X song. And being a music nerd, I do think there's a distinction. I have my own thoughts and rules. Yeah, about
you're right. That's a very good point.
Does not make something the ultimate Gen X song, but I don't want to bias you. I want to hear what you picked. Although transparency, he's already told me.
So when this Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
hold
true
on,
transparency. So it's
let me
not.
just-
You have to pretend to be
Right. We know.
surprised. No, that's really interesting. Yeah, exactly. Make your surprise face. No, that's really interesting that you delineate between an anthem and a song. And you're totally right about that, and that actually makes me feel better because I was just coming up with an anthem, and I made a very strong point in my story, which, by the way, when this is released, the story is up on Small Talk. It's called this is the quintessential Gen X anthem. And I kind of went very methodically. I had criteria and everything. It was like very listy. I even did like a brackets, like a Final Four brackets,
Wow.
and I
I
pitted
need to
different
hear the
songs against
criteria
each other.
too, but give the answer.
But yeah, exactly, the criteria. Yeah, well, we'll read it. I'll just so my answer from the anthem was "Smells Like Teen Spirit." Anna. Now that's an anthem, and I say it very clearly. This is not my favorite song. It's not even a song that's not even the best Nirvana song by any means. It's probably one of the worst. It's kind of like saying Stacy's Mom is the best Sounds of Wayne, but to give a reference before.
Yeah.
But no,
Right.
it's not the best.
Because everyone knows it.
Yeah, because everybody knows "Smells Like Teen Spirit" and everybody knows what that is. But to me, that defines a generation because it met a lot of the criteria that I put, which I should probably have up on my screen because I don't even remember what I wrote. But a lot of it was that it also, when you're talking about a Gen Xy song, it's hard because you're talking about the people across a span of 15 years, right? So if you were born in 65 as opposed to you were born in 1980, it's going to be a very different thing. But I feel like Nirvana bridges the gap between the 80s and the 90s very well. Right. And so to me, and then the whole the sort of not pessimism, the skepticism, the sort of we're not going to be sold to, here you are now, entertain us, this kind of like theme of it, the fact that it kind of ushered in a new era that was sort of like a break from the 80s kind of synth pop, then hair metal, to like this whole new thing that was very original.
Nope.
Now, you guys growing up in Seattle, you probably saw it, but for the rest, no, it was pretty original, huh?
We grew up in South
Well,
Florida.
Oh yeah, I
we grew up in
forgot.
South Florida.
Oh
but we
yeah,
moved
you
to
came here
Seattle
after.
right at the
Not
beginning
me.
peak of grunge.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
like
you
got
the
here in
song
so it
that-
was
96.
new, and the fact that it
Yeah,
came,
I got here
yeah,
in
it wasn't
96,
coming out of
so I
LA,
was
it wasn't coming out of
post-grunge.
New York.
He was.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so you were in the later.
already dead.
It wasn't. Yeah, you were post grunge. You were like a more the yeah. So it felt very new, and I just think that when people think about Gen X, they think about fairly or unfairly, they think about that kind of reality bites, grunge, flannel,
whatever.
Yeah. So to me, that's kind of an anthem. But the song that I think is the most Gen Xy, I kind of go back and forth that. Like I had one of the "Don't You Forget About Me" is another kind of almost cliche because it's so associated with Breakfast Club and with the 80s and John Hughes movies, and it's a song that actually when it comes on I still like it. Like I'm not sick of that song. I don't
Right.
So that one is, but then when I was doing my kind of like going through all the songs, and again, I'm a DJ, right? Like if you see in the back, I have thousands of vinyl records. I've been DJing forever. I've been DJing since I've been 13 years old. So this is like a very important question to me. Do you guys know the song "Groove Is in the Heart" by Delight?
Jonathan.
Of course.
Of course, right?
Of course.
I know you guys are. I know. I should have said, "Do you know?" Okay, so the song you can cut that part, the "Do you know" part. "Groove Is in the Heart" by Delight. To me, I don't know why that feels like such a Gen X song because it's like quirky and psychedelic and like retro, but cool and new. And I don't know. I'm gonna say "The Groove Is in the Heart" is a very Gen Xy song.
Nice. I love that. I'm not sure it would have come up in my top 10 or even top 100.
I know. And another reason I'll give is that when I
right.
play that song as a DJ, that is like a guaranteed floor filler.
Everyone gets on the floor.
Everybody will
Absolutely.
dance to that song, no matter
One
what
of my-
generation you're in. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. I remember hearing it for the first time, and it was absolutely like oh my God, I'm just a poor white boy, but I must move
I
and
must
shake my body
Exactly.
in certain ways because
Exactly.
groove is in my heart.
I know. It's like
And here's my
it's a
thought
killer.
on Smells
It's a
Like Teen
killer
Spirit,
track.
because our last guest, Walter Ryan, he gave that as his answer as well.
Okay.
I'm not even. Yeah. What?
I know. I feel like it's almost
I know.
cliche.
Well, this is
It's a
so-
cliche.
I just know where this is gonna go.
Oh, God.
And I have a few thoughts that are coming in at the same time because that's how my brain works. But the big one for me is when I first had this
Okay.
thought of what is the ultimate Gen Xy sort of song or playlist is these should be Gen X songs that are singular to Gen X. So to me, "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was a cultural moment, and Nirvana has continued to be that. Like people have still such a connection to it, It is so it comes from Gen X, but to me the ultimate. It transcends Yes, exactly. Thank
You're
you.
saying it
The influence
transcends
is almost
generation.
too big. Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Well,
Okay,
my
it's not
thought was in
uniquely
creating
Gen
the
X.
song is, what is a song that
Yeah.
only card carrying Gen Xers are going to know and love? It the same way. Like on the first time Lawrence and I talked about this, he was like "Sunglasses at Night" by Corey Hart, and I'm like, oh my god, right? Like no one else really is going to identify
That's a good one.
the same way. What some of the first songs that came up for me were like "Tainted Love" by Soft Cell. Like that does something to Gen X folks that other people
Yep.
won't hear. By Talking Heads.
Once in a
That's
lifetime.
a really good one.
Once in a lifetime, Talking
A
Heads.
quirkier one, but one I still
Yep.
think
Yep.
holds by my methodology is Birdhouse in Your Soul by They Might Be Giants. Like if you weren't born in a certain era,
That's
it
all.
is
That's
more alternative.
yeah,
I think that
alternative, yeah.
REM End of the World as We Know It or Losing My Religion could be contenders for this because
it's on my list.
children, especially my eldest, pretty musically astute and have gone back and found The Cure and the Smiths on their own. They came to me with it and a lot of other songs from our era, but they don't know REM at all. Like, yeah, REM kind of went quiet. I know they have the
interesting.
book out now and the biography about them.
And until
that
Beyonce
hap-
remixes and covers
The
them,
TikTok
maybe,
song.
Or it becomes a TikTok song,
Yeah,
right?
they know
that
we're
happens
not
like
sure.
where
or it becomes a
Yeah.
TikTok song.
Billy Joel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you know this song? I barely. Yeah,
I know. They know
they're almost
Zanzibar
sort of
by
big
Billy Joel. I know.
fans.
It's
I
crazy.
do also have a dream of having. I wish you could get more
I know.
people on a live because a friend of mine posted this on Facebook. It's not original, but I like, what is the best Billy Joel song? And I was like, he transcends generations, but I think that conversation is a very Gen X conversation where we have opinions. Because we're
I would love to have that
embarrassed, but we also
I'm
love
a
it,
huge
right?
Billy Joel
Only
fan,
the
so I
Good
could
Die
have that
Young
conversation.
is one of mine. I have a few.
Yeah.
Right.
I do love Only the Good.
Yeah. That's your favorite? What's interesting is mine is the one that TikTok discovered, which made me mad because it was never really a
Really?
big hit. And that's the song Zanzibar. Do you
yeah.
know guys know Zanzibar? I got the old man's car. I love that song. Yeah,
Don't know
anyway.
that one.
But this
Wow,
now that you've
that's
kind of
crazy.
told about your
Yes.
new criteria for what makes it song Gen Xy, that it's within
really
the
does.
generation, that kind of changes the way I think about
didn't
it. I
think
would
of-
definitely put Once in a Lifetime in there. Yeah, It's My Life by
My criteria was, I felt like it should be the music that you heard that you instantly loved, that
Mhm.
your parents hated, right? That
Right.
that was the moment where you were like, oh God, I have
That would be
different
hip-hop
musical
for
tastes
me.
than my parents. You know?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
that would be Rapper's
song,
Delight for me.
Yeah, right,
When
right.
oh my
Right.
That's a
God.
great one. That's a great example.
Right.
You know, for me it would have been Michael Jackson Thriller, right?
Yeah.
You know, my mom hated that song. My sister and I religiously tuned into MTV at the top of the hour to watch the
Oh my
rocket
gosh.
blast off, and then they played Thriller.
Yeah. Those were moments. What an event to have Thriller
Oh my
like that.
God.
Release of that
Rapper's
video. That
Delight,
was such a
like-
huge thing.
When Big Bag Hank,
And it's true, it's hard to
Big Bad
explain.
Hank died. That week I went to karaoke with some friends, and I was like, I'm going to karaoke Rapper's Delight because I know every word. But I did it by myself, and it was, I think, the 14-minute version. It was the really long one, and I almost had, I think I
That's
almost
so
died.
funny that you're telling because I did the same thing. The fact that we can both
except-
do the 14-minute is pretty cool, Dana.
It's mutual.
That makes me have a
and it
huge
did
respect
just
for
grow
you.
knowing that about you. And also, there's a reason there are 3 rappers on that song because you can't breathe if one person does all the vocal. By the time I got to Big Bad Hank's
you
part,
can't
I was
breathe.
like, yeah. Is it Big?
I think it's Big Bank Hank, just for those taking scores. Isn't it Big
Dumb
Bank
White
Hank?
Girl. Hold on.
I don't know if it's Big Bank Hank. I have to look that up.
No.
But it was very sad that he
Hold on,
died.
rapper.
Is it Big Bank Hank?
Jonathan, I will.
He came up
warn
as Big
you
Bank
that
Hank.
kind of in terms of like
Big
famous things to never do, in
Yeah.
addition to never start a land war in Asia,
Yeah.
is never get into a karaoke challenge night with Dana because she will go the entire night and nothing will intimidate her. She will karaoke suicide until the cows come
That
home.
was an interest. That was one of the criteria that I wanted to put was that it's a song that Gen X people will often sing in karaoke, right? The other thing is, do you think a Gen X song can be performed by somebody who's not part of who's not Gen X? Like, is Michael Stipe Gen X?
Is he old?
I don't know. Let's look him. How old is Michael Stipe?
Yeah, actually, maybe borderline, right? Because
Yeah.
they were at UGA before we were at University of Florida. Like
1960.
they were becoming
He's a
famous.
solid
So he's
boomer.
65.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is such a
Yeah.
He's
Such a
65.
question, Jonathan, of like, does
He's a
the
boomer.
Technically
singer or
boomer.
the band have to be of the age?
Right? Because all the
Boomers.
music we
Yep.
loved in the
Oh.
80s were really performed by boomers. I mean,
It's true. And
yeah, most of them. Like, don't you forget about me, definitely boomers now, those guys, because that was like 85 and
maybe
they
even.
were like in their
Yeah,
20s. Right.
that is such an interesting question. And the
yeah,
other
maybe even
question
older.
is, where did it hit you as a Gen Xer? Did you first hear it as a child? Did you first hear it as a young adult? Because to me, 90s
Hmm.
music, we were all young adults by then, and certainly hugely impactful.
Yeah.
But to me, when I think of Gen X music, I think of music from the 80s because I think of things that came in as I was coming of age. But a lot of people, Lawrence and I are 1970 babies. So
Yeah.
Right.
there are
Me too.
Gen Xers who are up to 10 years younger than us. And so to them, the 90s were their coming of age
Right.
era. So it is a span.
Yeah, that was why it's hard to come up with it, because I think they might say something like, yeah, they might like what's a 90s
Yeah,
classic? I mean, aside from like Pearl
Frederick
Jam and
said
Nirvana,
Linger
but
by
even
the
a little bit
Cranberries,
later.
which is a great song,
Right?
but to me is later.
Interesting.
Right.
Yes.
That's a 20s, when I'm in my 20s song. Yeah, I love
Right,
that song.
right. The thing
Yeah.
that I love about this question overall is, there are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of us Gen Xers out there, and there are going to be 100 million answers, right? Like,
Exactly.
I'm sure that someone somewhere is going to like die on the hill
I
of
love that song.
"Suddenly Last Summer" by the Motels is the
Wow.
like the Gen X song of all
cut,
time.
Lawrence.
I can't make that case,
That's
but I bet
beautiful.
someone else can.
That's a great one. How about, I mean, How Soon Is Now? I mean, that's
Very
depressing, How
quintessential
Soon Is Now, but that
Not
song
my favorite Smith
is
song
just,
by Miles, but such a Gen X song.
yeah. No, it
It's
isn't
such a-
my best, but it's such a good, like, it just takes me back. Every time I hear it, I can
I
like
would say the same.
be
Like, Just Like
transported
Heaven
to where I
also,
was, and
if
yeah,
you're gonna go
how
for
I
pure
felt. And stuff.
counterpart is the one that was mine and my first boyfriend's song. you know?
Yeah.
It is such a good one.
Just like Heaven.
Hi,
did it.
Todd.
Right, but Just Like Heaven, does that resonate with somebody who was born in 1980?
There's Danielle
Hi, Todd.
anyway.
I just wonder. Yeah. Anyway, well, this is a good.
We're going to.
We got to do a whole episode on music,
We-
and then a
we-
movie,
we
and a
could-
movie too.
we
You
could-
should also. It's also what's the quintessential Gen X movie,
song.
or
Right.
just movie.
I mean,
like,
then you get into like
yeah, is it
Peter
Breakfast
Gabriel.
Club or is it Clueless? Like, it can be different,
See,
right?
to
like,
me, Clueless
so,
is a millennial
yeah,
movie,
I don't know.
but to me, Heathers is the ultimate. Like, I already know it's Heathers.
Interesting.
And do you know? I don't even know if you guys know
Yeah.
this, but maybe. Yeah, Lawrence and I
Like,
saw that in the
I
theater
don't need to
together,
think about
right?
it. The
And we
answer
walked
is
out of the theater
Heathers.
and we're like, "What the fuck was that?" Did you?
We did.
What was?
Right.
Yes.
Pretty sure we saw it in the
Maybe
theater
Fast
and then
Times at
took
Ridgemont
other
High.
people
Yes.
to go back.
Fast
and,
Times at Ridgemont High
Fast Times
for
at
old.
Ridgemont High.
Fast
That might be
Times,
one.
But Heathers was
uh,
I think the first like
Fast
theater
Times at Ridgemont
repeat.
High for older Gen Xers
Well,
is to
that's amazing.
Heathers
After Star
for
Wars.
mid-younger. But did you guys know that Heathers is now a
For
fucking
older.
musical, like a Broadway
Yep.
musical? And my kids play it, and I'm like,
Oh, interesting.
so the movie, you guys, is making fun of what this musical is. Like, this can't be a musical. Like, there's a song called, yes, it's a, what's the line he says at the funeral?
Right.
I love my
The whole
dead
thing
son.
is-
I think that might be
yeah.
the name of one of the
Right,
songs.
the whole thing, yeah, antithetical.
I know there's a song called Dead Girl Walking where she's like, da da da, I'm a dead girl walking.
That's good.
At the end when she's going to kill
I
him.
honestly, now I have to go
And
see
there's
it.
another
Yeah.
song about like I can't. I don't know if it's recorded. Oh yeah, my
Oh,
kids
my
like
God.
the movie a lot.
I gotta watch that
made
with my
them
daughter.
wait
I gotta watch
you know why
Heathers
I
with my
made them
daughter.
wait to see Heathers?
Does it carry?
Honestly,
Do kids like
love
it?
horror movies. They've seen, and they've watched Euphoria. They've seen
Okay.
Hereditary and Midsommar. Shit, I won't even watch because I don't like horror. But I made them wait till they were
Mm-hmm.
a bit older on Heathers, and you know why? It was because
Yeah.
most things I'm like, I need to
Right.
be able to talk to them about it, and I'm not afraid of exposing them to it. But the scene when Heather Chandler, Heather number one, takes Veronica to the college party, remember? And it's like a big deal that I got you into a college party. And the dude hits on Winona Ryder, Veronica, and she ditches him. But there's a scene with the first Heather where the guy's like, "But you're just so hot. You're turning me on so much." And she wants to get back out to the party, but he sort of pushes her head down, right? And it's just left like that. And then the next scene, she's in the bathroom. Yep, like rinsing out her mouth, and then she
yeah.
spits that water to the mirror with like
Right,
those,
and then the
like,
cutscene is she's spitting on the mirror.
self-loathing, like revulsion on her face. And I was like, I
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
how to explain to my young daughters this sense
Right.
of like peer pressure and self-loathing that came from her
Yeah, the
giving that
kids.
guy head. And I don't even know if they'll understand it or that scene will blow past, but it was so
Mm,
dark that I was like, to me, that is
yeah,
a
that's
really
heavy.
bleak moment that I was like, I'd like you to be a little older. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of things. Yeah. There's a lot of things in 80s
You all
movies
remember?
that are
Yeah,
like, that are hard for our kids to like handle,
Yes.
right? Like they're not almost more in a kind of like a woke or PC kind
16
of way. Like they're
Candles,
just like,
too.
what
He
and they're
hands off
right.
the.
Like, I mean, in Revenge of the Nerds, there's like a rape scene. Like there's some stuff that's like
right,
shocking. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
Weird
16
Science is
Candles.
about two dweebs completely, like, literally creating a girlfriend to order and
You're right.
objectifying her, and yeah.
Yeah.
I knowing that Heather's is a musical and thinking of that scene,
Yes.
Dana,
And
okay,
Marge
do
just,
y'all remember
yes.
the Simpsons episode where they do a
Yes.
musical Streetcar Named Desire, and
That's
it's
hilarious.
Kindness of
a complete
strangers.
misread of Streetcar, because at the end she's like, "You can always depend on
Yeah.
the kindness of strangers.
And you
Right.
and
So good.
pets. I
Here's a
do
tip from
remember that.
Blanche you won't forget. A
This actually, The
stranger's
Simpsons
just a
is, even though
friend
it's
you
gone on forever, that
haven't
is such a gem.
met."
It is. I absolutely. We could sit and talk forever, you guys. I feel like we've already.
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the end of that one was an absolute disaster. I am Lawrence Winterman. This was another episode of the GenXy podcast. My co-host today was the always lovely Dana Dubois and our special guest, Jonathan Small. Thank you, Jonathan, for stopping by to talk with us. As always, this podcast is a production of GenXy. GenXy is Lawrence Winterman and Dana Dubois. We are responsible for all of the content, and we hope you listen to us next time. We'll be back every week with a new podcast on Monday morning, and be sure to tune in to our regular The Daily Whatever lives on Substack every weekday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific Time and 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Goodbye.